Well, this election marks the closest New York has come to turning red in 30 years. The Board of Elections reporting VP Harris led Trump by about 11% compared to 2020, when Joe Biden won the state by 23%.
Joining us now to tell us about this red shift is Ben Max, executive editor of the Center for New York City and State Law at New York Law School. Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, here in the city, usually deep blue part of the state, Trump got about 30% of the vote. And overall, just like we mentioned, Harris led Trump by about 11% across New York State. Numbers that have gone down since, 2008 with Obama. Do these numbers surprise you?
They don't surprise me much. I mean, I think there's a lot of cause for alarm for Democrats in the state to be losing ground to Republicans, but especially after what we saw in the 2022 gubernatorial election, where Republican Lee Zeldin came within 6 points of Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul. I think we saw some of these signs coming, certainly, and we've also seen very low approval numbers for especially Joe Biden here in the state and Governor Hochul, and I was expecting this margin to be roughly what it was, and so I think Democrats have some soul-searching to do, and Republicans continue to have some momentum here in New York.
Yeah, it's not just New York, of course. Polls show a number of states, including New Jersey. We did a story how a lot of those counties are shifting red as well. Why do you think we're seeing this, not only in the Northeast, but across the country?
Well, listen, this election was, really a huge victory, far more expansive for Donald Trump than anyone, I think, really expected. And I think the bottom line here, you could point to probably a dozen reasons, but the top two really are that people have been so frustrated and challenged by inflation and the cost of living, and that this was seen as a referendum on the Biden years and the Biden-Harris years, and that Donald Trump, even though he's a former president, even though he's got all sorts of baggage and all sorts of challenges, he was seen as someone who could bring change to the situation and potentially improve the challenges that people are facing. And so I think all across the country, you saw something of a backlash to Democratic power in the White House.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. I mean, how do you think a Trump presidency is going to impact us here in New York?
Well, I think it's important to note that there's a big swing factor still at play here, partly due to New York, which is whether there will be a Democratic or Republican majority in the House of Representatives. So we know there will be a Republican in the White House. We know there will be Republican control of the U.S. Senate. And a lot of what happens or doesn't happen out of Washington and vis-a-vis policy and budgetary decisions affecting New York will hinge a lot on whether it's a Democratic or Republican House. Under Democrats, it would be led very likely by a Speaker Hakeem Jeffries of Brooklyn, and again, giving more attention to things like funding for New York. So that's a big X factor out there. But we also know that Donald Trump has a lot of policy plans that will impact New York in a variety of ways. We don't know exactly how all of those will unfold, depending on how well they're executed and what form they really take. But whether it's from immigration to health care and many other things, there's going to be a shift of policy, a very big one on the national level that will have a significant impact on New York City.
Yeah, and you sort of touched on it a little bit, but do you think a different Democratic candidate could have had a different result, or was this just an anti-incumbent environment? No matter who the candidate had been, we would have seen pretty much the same result.
I think it's a great question that is worth a lot of debate. I think that nominating the vice president of a very unpopular administration in the White House, which again, partly due to their own failings, partly due to their own inability to sell some of the progress they have been making, but to not have sort of the open primary that could have led perhaps to a more popular nominee outside of the current administration probably hamstrung Democrats a little bit here. But the Harris campaign, coming in when it did, ran a pretty strong campaign, but this was a very sort of anti-democratic power environment. And it's interesting, you see even Democratic candidates in New York in House districts running ahead of Harris, in part because it seems like so many voters were blaming the Biden administration for some of these challenges that were not fixed to their liking over these last 4 years.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, Ben Max, thank you so much.